You will leave this marriage with nothing exactly what you deserve." Jason Morgan said it directly into Emily's face, his hand gripping her wrist so hard she felt the bones compress his eyes, carrying the absolute cold certainty of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. He had spent 2 years stealing her patents, erasing her name from every document, and turning her own company against her, all while she slept beside him and called him husband. He walked into that courtroom believing he had already buried her. Subscribe. Follow this story to the very end and comment your city. I want to see how far Emily's truth travels. The morning of the divorce hearing, Emily Carter woke up at 5:45, not because she had set an alarm, but because she had not really slept. She lay still in the guest bedroom of the house that had once been hers, in every meaningful way, the house she had decorated, the house where she had cooked Sunday dinners, the house where she had once believed she was building something real, and she stared at the ceiling for a long time without moving. She did not cry. She had stopped crying approximately 14 months ago on a Tuesday evening in November when she had opened a document on Jason's personal laptop while he slept and understood with the sudden cold clarity of a woman who had been deceived for a very long time exactly what her husband had been doing to her. That night she had gone into the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub, and allowed herself 45 minutes of the kind of crying that comes from the deepest place inside a person, silent, ugly, the kind that leaves no sound, only damage. Then she had washed her face, walked back to the bedroom, and looked at Jason sleeping peacefully, and something inside her had simply closed, like a door, quietly, completely, without a sound, and it had never opened again. Now she sat up, placed her feet on the floor, and breathed. Today was not a day for feeling. Today was a day for finishing. She dressed carefully, a charcoal gray blazer, pressed trousers, low heels. Nothing designed to impress, nothing designed to provoke. She looked like a woman who had somewhere important to be and intended to get there without fuss. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup was minimal. She wore no jewelry except for a small plain watch on her left wrist, one that Jason had never given her, one she had bought herself with the first paycheck from the first job she had taken before she ever met him. She had kept that watch through 12 years of marriage to a billionaire because it reminded her of something she had almost forgotten, that she had existed before him and she would exist after. She was pouring coffee in the kitchen when she heard Jason's footsteps on the stairs. He always came down at exactly 6:15. He was a man of precise routines, mostly because he believed that discipline signaled dominance, and Jason Morgan had spent his entire adult life signaling dominance to every room he entered. He appeared in the kitchen doorway in his best suit, charcoal expensive, perfectly fitted, and he looked at her with the particular expression she had come to think of as his negotiating face. Not hostile, not warm, calculating. The face of a man who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the other party to catch up. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied. That was the entirety of the conversation. He poured his own coffee. She finished hers. They stood in the same kitchen where they had once laughed together, argued about grocery lists, planned vacations that sometimes happened and sometimes didn't, and they did not look at each other. Jason broke the silence first, which she had expected, because Jason always needed to be the one to define the terms of any silence. "You look composed," he said. It wasn't a compliment, it was surveillance. "I am composed," she said. He watched her for a moment over the rim of his mug. "You know how today is going to go, Emily." "Yes," she said. "I do." "Then I hope we can keep it dignified." He said the word dignified, the way certain powerful men say certain words as a threat, wrapped inside a courtesy. What he meant was, don't make a scene, don't fight, don't embarrass me. What he meant was, lose quietly. Emily set her mug in the sink and picked up her bag. "I'll see you there," she said. And she walked out of the kitchen without looking back at him. And she did not allow herself to feel anything at all until she was in her car with the door closed and the engine running, and even then she only allowed herself 3 slow breaths before she put the car in drive. 3 breaths. That was all she permitted, because today was not for feelings. Today was for finishing. The courtroom was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Chicago, where the floors were marble and the air smelled faintly of old wood and institutional power. Emily had been inside it twice before, once for a deposition 2 years ago regarding a licensing dispute that no one had fully explained to her at the time, and once 3 months ago when she had met privately with her own attorney, a woman named Patricia Hale, who had a reputation in certain Chicago legal circles for being the kind of lawyer that other lawyers were quietly afraid of. Patricia was already seated when Emily arrived. She was 61, compact, with silver hair cut close to her head and the kind of still watchful quality that comes from spending decades in rooms where other people underestimated her. She looked up when Emily sat down and gave her a single measured nod. "How are you?" Patricia said quietly. "Ready," Emily said. Patricia studied her face for a moment, then nodded again. "Good." Jason entered 3 minutes later with his attorney, a man named Richard Voss, who was by most measures one of the top divorce litigators in Illinois, a fact that Jason had made sure was mentioned in at least 2 separate conversations with Emily over the past 6 months, not because it was relevant, but because Jason communicated power through the names he could afford to hire. Richard Voss was tall, well-dressed, and exuded the practiced confidence of a man who had won a great deal of money for a great many powerful men, and he and Jason walked into that courtroom together, the way men walk into rooms when they believe the outcome is already settled. Jason glanced at Emily when he sat down. She looked straight ahead. He leaned toward Richard and said something low. Richard smiled. Patricia did not smile. She opened her briefcase and organized her papers with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had nothing to prove. The judge was the Honorable Margaret Chen, 58 years old, 22 years on the bench, a woman who had presided over enough divorce proceedings to have lost any remaining patience for theater. She entered the room and sat without ceremony, and the room adjusted itself around her the way rooms always do around genuine authority. "We're here in the matter of Morgan versus Carter," Judge Chen said, settling her glasses. "Counsel, are we prepared to proceed?" "We are, Your Honor," said Richard Voss with the smooth confidence of a man presenting a foregone conclusion. Patricia Hale said simply, "Yes, Your Honor." And the proceeding began. Jason had, by his own account, spent 2 years preparing for this day. That was not an exaggeration. From the moment he had decided the marriage was over, which was, if Emily had known it, approximately 18 months before he filed a timeline that should tell you something about the kind of man he was, he had been methodically engineering the financial architecture of their separation. He had moved assets quietly, carefully through a series of holding companies and offshore accounts that were technically legal in the way that many things done by very wealthy men with very clever lawyers are technically legal, while being entirely designed to deprive the other party of what was rightfully theirs. He had restructured his ownership of Titan Systems, the technology company that had made him a billionaire, through a series of corporate maneuvers that effectively reduced Emily's association with the company to a historical footnote. She had been listed as a co-founder on the original incorporation documents. She was now on paper simply a former employee, an early one, notably compensated, but an employee. He had also had the prenuptial agreement reviewed by 3 separate attorneys over the past year and a half, looking for weaknesses, finding none. Or so he believed, and had arrived at this courtroom with what he privately considered an impenetrable case. He expected a fight. He was prepared for one. He had actually, in the privacy of his own imagination, somewhat rehearsed for one. What he was not prepared for was what actually happened. When Richard Voss finished presenting the terms of the proposed settlement, Jason retaining full ownership of Titan Systems, the Chicago townhouse, the Aspen property, the Malibu house, the investment portfolio, the cars, and everything else that constituted the material evidence of 12 years of shared accumulation with Emily, receiving a cash settlement that was generous in the way that calculated insults are sometimes wrapped in generosity, Emily did not object. Patricia Hale reviewed the documents calmly, asked 2 procedural questions, received her answers, and then looked at Emily. Emily said, "I'm ready to sign." The room was quiet in a particular way that rooms become quiet when something is happening that people don't fully understand yet. Richard Voss blinked. Just once, but Emily saw it. Even Judge Chen, who had seen everything, paused for a fraction of a second before speaking. Jason leaned back in his chair with the unhurried ease of a man watching exactly what he expected to watch, and something in his jaw relaxed in a way that was almost imperceptible unless you had spent 12 years memorizing that jaw, and Emily had. The documents were prepared. They were passed to Emily. She picked up the pen, a plain black ballpoint, the kind of pen you find in any courtroom. Nothing ceremonial about it, and she signed. Every page, every line, without pausing, without reading through for the 20th time, without looking up to see if Jason was watching. She signed the way a person signs when they are not gambling, when the outcome of the signing is not the thing they are waiting for. When she set the pen down, the room was still. And then because he was Jason Morgan, and he was constitutionally incapable of silence when he believed he had won something, Jason said quietly across the room to her, "I hope you know I never wanted it to come to this." Emily looked at him then. For the first time all morning, she looked directly at him. She said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood, and had understood for some time now, that the most devastating response to a man who has spent his life commanding the volume in every room is to give him absolute silence. Jason's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Just enough. Judge Chen finalized the proceeding. The marriage of Jason Morgan and Emily Carter, which had begun 12 years ago on a warm September evening when they had both believed in something, was legally dissolved. Emily stood, straightened her blazer, picked up her bag, and said to Patricia quietly, "Thank you." Patricia said just as quietly, "It's done." They walked out together, and Emily did not look at Jason, and Jason watched her go with the particular expression of a man who has gotten everything he asked for and has just noticed for the first time that the thing he got might not be the thing he thought it was. In the corridor outside the courtroom, Patricia touched Emily's arm briefly. "How do you feel?" she asked. Emily considered the question honestly for a moment, the way she had been allowing herself to consider things honestly for 14 months now, ever since that Tuesday evening in November when everything changed. "Like it's finally real," she said. Patricia nodded. "It is." Emily looked down the long marble corridor toward the elevators, toward the lobby, toward the street outside where Chicago was doing what Chicago always does in the early fall gray sky wind off the lake, the city indifferent and enormous and full of motion. "There's somewhere I need to be," Emily said. "I know," Patricia said. "Go." Jason came out of this courtroom 90 seconds later, still in conversation with Richard Voss, still carrying that settled proprietary ease of a man who has confirmed something he already knew. He was already on his phone when he stepped into the corridor, already moving forward, already in his own mind past this. He had a meeting at 2 o'clock, investors, a new partnership, life continuing at the pace and scale it had always continued at, because Jason Morgan's life did not pause for things as small as endings. He was speaking to someone on the phone, his assistant, his CFO. It didn't matter when he pushed through the revolving door at the main entrance of the building and stepped out onto the sidewalk, and that was when he saw it. A car. Black. Armored. Long and low and absolutely silent, in the way that only certain vehicles at a certain price point are silent, not quiet, not understated, but categorically silent, the way fortresses are silent. A Maybach specifically, and not the kind that wealthy men lease for occasion, the kind that is purchased, customized, and assigned. It was parked directly in front of the courthouse steps, and there was a driver standing beside it in a dark suit, and the driver was not looking at Jason. The driver was looking at the door behind Jason, and then Emily stepped out, still composed, still unhurried. Her blazer still perfectly straight, her bag still on her shoulder, her face still carrying that expression of absolute unshakable finality that had unsettled every person in that courtroom, and that now in the gray Chicago daylight struck Jason Morgan with a force he was entirely unprepared for, because the driver opened the door for her. And from inside the car, stepping out to meet her, was a man that Jason recognized immediately, because in the world that Jason inhabited, certain faces were known the way certain names were known, not because you had met them, but because they represented a scale of power that made your own seem suddenly provisional. Thomas Croft, chairman of Vanguard Holdings, a private equity firm that did not advertise, did not seek publicity, did not appear in the kinds of articles that Jason read about his competitors, because Vanguard Holdings operated at a level where publicity was a liability rather than an asset. Vanguard Holdings, which Jason knew, which every serious player in the technology investment space knew, had quietly become one of the most consequential financial entities in the country over the past decade. Thomas Croft was 63, silver-haired, lean. He had the quality that genuine wealth, not new wealth, not performed wealth, but real old layered wealth, sometimes produces in people a kind of absolute ease, as though the world had been arranged to his specifications, and he was simply moving through it. He did not look at Jason. He looked at Emily, and he smiled. Not the smile of a business contact, not the smile of a formal acquaintance, but the quiet, warm smile of a man greeting someone he genuinely respects, someone he has been waiting for. And he extended his hand, and Emily took it, and they stood on the steps of the courthouse for a moment, while Jason stood 6 feet away and felt something happening that he could not immediately name. Emily said something to Thomas Croft that Jason could not hear. Thomas Croft laughed a real laugh, short and genuine, and said something back. Emily nodded. And then she looked at Jason, just for a moment, just one look, not triumphant, not cold, not anything that could be easily categorized or dismissed. She looked at him the way you look at something you are leaving behind, with complete recognition of what it was and complete acceptance that it is now behind you. And then she stepped into the car. The door closed. The Maybach pulled away from the curb with the smooth, absolute silence of something that has never needed to prove itself to anyone. And Jason Morgan stood on the sidewalk outside the courthouse where he had just won everything he had planned to win, and he watched the car until it turned the corner and disappeared, and he felt the first cold edge of something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt it the way a man feels the draft that comes through a wall before he understands that the wall has a crack in it. Richard Voss appeared beside him. "Jason, ready? We should get ahead of the 2 o'clock." Jason did not answer immediately. He was still looking at the corner where the car had turned. "Who drives a Maybach like that?" he said. And it came out different than he intended, quieter, with something underneath it that he would not have wanted Richard to hear. Richard paused, looked at the empty street. "I'm sorry." "Nothing," Jason said, and he picked up his phone and made the call he needed to make, and he got into his own car, and he told himself it was nothing, and he made himself believe it for approximately 4 hours. 4 hours until the call came in that changed everything. But that is a different part of this story. What matters right now in this moment is this. Emily Carter sat in the back of that car and looked out the window at the city she had lived in for 12 years, the city she had navigated as Jason Morgan's wife, the city that had watched her disappear slowly into the background of a more powerful person's story. And she felt for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember entirely like herself. Thomas Croft sat across from her and said, "It's done." "It's done," she said. He nodded once. "Then we move." Emily looked out the window at Chicago passing by the lake, visible between buildings gray and enormous, and indifferent, the way truth is sometimes indifferent, the way it simply exists, regardless of whether anyone is ready for it. "We move," she agreed, and the car moved through the city silent and unhurried, carrying a woman that her ex-husband had believed he had reduced to nothing. He had made that mistake 14 months ago on a Tuesday evening in November when he had fallen asleep without checking whether his laptop was closed. He would spend the rest of this story understanding the cost of it. But Emily Carter was already thinking about what came next. She had been thinking about it for 14 months, and she was ready. Jason Morgan was good at compartmentalizing. It was in many ways the skill that had made him a billionaire. The ability to close a door inside himself, walk away from whatever was behind it, and focus entirely on what was in front of him. It was efficient. It was, he had always told himself, a form of discipline that lesser men simply did not possess. So when he got into his car outside the courthouse, and the image of that black Maybach kept pressing itself against the inside of his thoughts, he closed a door on it. Thomas Croft was a major player. Emily had clearly made a contact somewhere. It was surprising, yes. It was worth a follow-up inquiry, perhaps. But it was not, he told himself firmly, a reason for alarm. He had won. The papers were signed. It was over. He told himself that 3 times before his car reached Michigan Avenue, and by the 3rd time he almost believed it. Richard Voss sat beside him, already reviewing documents on his tablet, already moving forward the way very expensive lawyers move forward, without sentiment, without backward glance, without the slightest interest in the emotional residue of anything they have just accomplished. The 2 o'clock is a preliminary discussion, Richard said. Danvers and the Vanguard rep, routine framework conversation. Shouldn't run more than 90 minutes. Jason looked up. Vanguard rep. Vanguard Holdings. Richard did not look up from his tablet. They reached out last week about a potential acquisition framework. Titan Systems adjacent, minor stuff. They're people your CFO, preliminary terms. You're just there to signal interest. Jason said nothing for a moment. Who's representing Vanguard? He asked. Richard scrolled. A woman named Patricia Hale, attorney. Jason felt something move through him that he could not immediately identify. Patricia Hale is a divorce attorney. Richard looked up then. I'm sorry. Patricia Hale. She was in the courtroom this morning. She's Emily's attorney. Richard was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, which was for Richard Voss an unusual amount of time to be quiet about anything. Then he said carefully, That's a coincidence. Is it? Jason said. It was not a question. Richard set his tablet down. For the first time all day, he looked at Jason with something that was not confidence. Do you want to reschedule? He said. Jason looked out the window at Chicago moving past. He thought about the Maybach. He thought about Thomas Croft not looking at him. He thought about Emily signing those papers without hesitation, without pausing, without any of the resistance he had spent 2 years preparing to defeat. No, he said, I don't reschedule. He said it the way he said most things, with the flat certainty of a man who equates changing course with weakness, and he had built too much of his identity on that equation to question it now. We go, he said. Richard picked up his tablet again, but he did not look quite as settled as he had before. They arrived at the building on Wacker at 1:47. Jason's CFO, a man named Daniel Frey, who was meticulous loyal and had been with Jason for 9 years, met them in the lobby. Daniel had the particular quality of a man who wanted to say something and had decided for the moment not to. Jason noticed. What? Nothing. Daniel fell into step beside him. Just the Vanguard team got here early, 20 minutes early. Who does that? Richard said mildly. People who want to establish something, Jason said. They rode the elevator to the 32nd floor in silence. The conference room was glass-walled, the kind of room designed to make negotiation feel transparent when it is anything but. And when the elevator doors opened, Jason could see through the glass that there were already 3 people seated at the far end of the table. He pushed open the conference room door and walked in, and the temperature in the room felt different than expected, not colder exactly, but more deliberate, like the air pressure in a room where something has already been decided. The Vanguard team consisted of 2 attorneys and a financial analyst. Patricia Hale sat at the near end of the table, composed a legal pad in front of her, a coffee cup to her right. She looked at Jason when he entered with an expression of complete professional neutrality. Mr. Morgan, she said, thank you for making time. Ms. Hale, Jason said. He kept his voice level. He was very good at keeping his voice level. He sat. His team sat. Papers were arranged. The rituals of corporate negotiation began brief introductions, a framing of the meeting's purpose, the careful, polite language that sits on top of meetings where significant money is at stake. Jason listened. He asked 2 questions. He let Richard take the lead on technical terms. He performed the role of the senior executive who is present to signal authority rather than engage in detail, and he did it well because he had done it hundreds of times. But something was wrong. He could feel it, the way you feel, whether not see it, not touch it, just feel it in the pressure of the air. The Vanguard attorneys were saying the right things. They were using the right language. The financial analyst was presenting numbers that were coherent and interesting and pointed toward a discussion about a potential partnership structure involving some of Titan's newer infrastructure licensing arrangements, and Patricia Hale had said almost nothing. She sat at the end of the table and made occasional notes and did not speak except to answer direct questions, and she answered them briefly and precisely, and Jason could not figure out why a divorce attorney was in this meeting at all. He was formulating a question, a careful, controlled question, designed to surface the answer without revealing that he needed it when the door opened, and Emily walked in. Jason's first thought was purely physical. His body processed it before his mind did a spike of adrenaline, a tightening in his chest, the kind of involuntary response that only happens when something completely outside your expectations enters your field of vision. She was still in the blazer she had worn to the courthouse. She was still composed. She was carrying a leather portfolio that he had never seen before, slim and dark, and she set it on the table as she sat down across from him without a word of greeting, not beside Patricia Hale, across from Jason. "What?" Jason said, and it came out flat and hard in a way he had not entirely intended. "Is this?" Emily opened the portfolio. "This," she said, "is a conversation we should have had a long time ago." Daniel Frey leaned toward Jason and said very quietly, "Jason, I can see that," Jason said not quietly. He looked at Patricia Hale. "What exactly is the nature of Vanguard's representation here? Because if this is some kind of—" "Mr. Morgan," Patricia's voice was perfectly even, "Vanguard Holdings is represented by their own counsel, who will be joining us in approximately 4 minutes. I'm here representing my client's interests in a separate but related matter. The two are connected, which is why we're all in the same room." "Related matter," Jason repeated. "You were in divorce proceedings with me 3 hours ago." "I was," Patricia said, "and those proceedings are concluded. What we're discussing now is a corporate matter, an entirely different legal context." Jason looked at Emily. Emily was looking at the portfolio she had opened, arranging documents with the same unhurried patience she had shown all morning, and she did not look up. "Emily." His voice had an edge now. He wasn't entirely in control of that edge. "What are you doing?" She looked up then. She met his eyes directly, and he saw in her face exactly what he had seen in the courtroom, that complete, unshakable absence of anything to prove. "I'm protecting what's mine," she said. And then the door opened again, and Thomas Croft walked in. He did not look at Jason. He pulled out the chair beside Emily and sat, and he said to the room generally, "Apologies for the delay. Shall we begin?" There was a moment, a specific, exact moment, where Jason Morgan understood that he was not in the meeting he had been told he was attending. He understood it the way you understand certain things all at once and too late. "I want to know," Jason said, and his voice was controlled, but only barely, "exactly what is happening in this room right now." Thomas Croft looked at him. It was the first time Thomas Croft had looked at him directly since they had been in the same physical space, and the quality of that look was something Jason filed away immediately and would think about for a long time afterward. Not hostile, not triumphant, simply the look of a man who was about to explain something to someone who should have seen it coming. "Mr. Morgan," Thomas said, "we're here to discuss the future ownership structure of Titan Systems." Jason went very still. "I own Titan Systems," he said. "You did," Thomas said. "The situation has evolved somewhat." Richard Voss put his hand on Jason's arm, a gesture that was part caution and part warning, and Jason became aware that Richard's hand was not entirely steady. Emily placed the first document on the table and slid it across to Jason. He looked at it. It was a software licensing agreement. Specifically, it was the original software licensing agreement for the core operating architecture of Titan Systems, the proprietary system that sat at the foundation of everything the company had built in its first 3 years. The code that had made Titan competitive before it was capitalized, before it was scaled, before it was anything more than 2 people in a shared office working 18-hour days because they believed in something. He knew this document. He had signed it himself 11 years ago. He had not thought about it in 9 years because it was a foundational document, the kind that exists in files and is not revisited because it is simply assumed to be settled. He looked at the licensor's name. He looked at it for a long time. EC Technologies, LLC, he read aloud. His voice was strange to his own ears. Incorporated in Delaware, Emily said. 8 months before we incorporated Titan Systems jointly. The core software architecture, the system you've been building on for 11 years, was licensed to Titan from EC Technologies. Not assigned, licensed. Jason looked up from the document. That license was permanent. It was renewable, Emily said, annually, with a 90-day written notice provision in the event either party wished to modify or terminate the arrangement. Jason stared at her. That clause was never exercised, Emily said, until 14 months ago. She slid a second document across the table. Notice of license modification was served to Titan Systems' registered legal address on November 14th, 14 months ago. Signed, witnessed, and filed with the Delaware Secretary of State the same day. November 14th, 14 months ago, a Tuesday. Jason felt the air leave his lungs in a way that was entirely involuntary. He thought about a Tuesday evening in November. He thought about going to sleep. He thought about his laptop. He thought about waking up and Emily being in the kitchen making coffee and her face being entirely ordinary and him thinking nothing of it and going about his day. He thought about 14 months of her going about things, calmly, without visible change, without a single indication that anything was different. You served notice 14 months ago, he said. I did, she said, and said nothing. You didn't ask, she said simply. Richard Voss leaned in and was speaking rapidly in Jason's ear, something about reviewing the document, about the enforceability of the clause, about needing time to assess, and Jason heard it the way you hear things underwater, present, but distorted because the foreground of his attention was entirely occupied by understanding what he was looking at. Emily had known on that November night what she had found on his laptop. She had understood in that moment the full shape of what he had been building against her. And instead of confronting him, instead of filing for divorce immediately, instead of doing any of the things that a person does when they have been betrayed and are acting from pain, instead of all of that, she had gotten up, gone to her attorney, and started building. For 14 months. While living in the same house, while sharing the same kitchen, while saying good morning and good evening and all the ordinary nothing of a marriage in its final silent phase, she had been building. The license modification, Thomas Croft said, picking up the thread with the ease of a man who has been briefed very thoroughly, restricts Titan Systems' use of the EC Technologies architecture to existing product lines only. No new development, no derivative products, no API licensing to third parties. He paused. Which effectively freezes Titan's expansion roadmap. All of it. Jason's CFO, Daniel, made a sound that was not quite a word. You can't enforce that, Jason said. He said it with conviction, but the conviction was working hard. The company has been operating on this architecture for 11 years. There are statutory protections for... We've reviewed the statutory framework extensively, Patricia said. The license agreement is airtight. It was drafted by a very good attorney. Who? Jason said. Patricia smiled just slightly. Me, she said. 8 months before you and Emily incorporated Titan Systems together. She came to me then. She was 27 years old. She had written every line of that core software herself, and she wanted to make sure that whatever happened, whatever the future looked like, that work was protected. Jason stared at her. She was 27, he said, and it came out almost like a question. She was 27, Patricia confirmed. And she was paying attention in ways that I think you did not expect. The room was quiet. Jason looked at Emily. Emily was looking at her portfolio, straightening documents that were already straight, and she was not performing composure anymore. She simply was composed, the way the center of something is still even when everything around it is moving. Emily. His voice was different now. The edge was gone. What was underneath it was something raw, something he would not have wanted anyone in that room to hear. Emily, look at me. She looked up. When did you... He stopped. Tried again. How long have you been planning this? She held his gaze for a moment. I've been protecting myself since the day I wrote that software, she said. I've been executing a plan for 14 months. The difference between those two things is you. He felt that land somewhere specific inside his chest. Thomas Croft set a third document on the table, and this one was different from the others. thicker, tabbed, the kind of document that represents not a single agreement but a structure, a series of interconnected arrangements that have been built over time into something comprehensive. Vanguard Holdings, Thomas said, has been acquiring Titan Systems debt positions for the past 11 months, quietly through intermediary vehicles in the secondary market. He tapped the document. We currently hold 63% of Titan's outstanding debt obligations, which, given the license freeze on the core architecture and the resulting impact on Titan's expansion revenue projections. Stop, Jason said. Thomas stopped. Jason looked at the document. He did not touch it. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they cannot yet bring themselves to pick up. Daniel Frey said very quietly, Jason, we need to... I said stop. Jason pressed both palms flat on the table. He breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. And then he said to Emily directly, What do you want? Emily reached into her portfolio one final time and placed a single page on the table between them. It was simple, cleanly formatted, not long. Full attribution of the core software architecture, she said. Restoration of my co-founder status on the original corporate record. 40% equity in Titan Systems held by EC Technologies. And your public acknowledgement in writing that you did not build this alone. Jason read the page. He read it twice. Richard Voss was speaking again, rapid and low, and Jason was hearing it and not hearing it, and the boardroom with its glass walls and its city view and its very expensive furniture was very quiet in a way that it had not been quiet before, because the kind of quiet that fills a room when power shifts is different from every other kind of quiet. It is heavier. It is final. Jason looked up from the page. He looked at Emily. And for the first time in 12 years, possibly for the first time in his adult life, Jason Morgan did not know what to say. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the document that told him exactly what his company was standing on, and he looked at the woman across the table who had built it, and he felt the ground shifting beneath everything he believed about himself. You planned all of this, he said. It was not an accusation. It was something closer to not quite admiration, but its edges. I protected what was mine, she said again. I told you that when I walked in. Richard Voss put a hand on Jason's arm again. We need to recess. We need time to review. How much time? Thomas Croft asked pleasantly. Patricia Hale looked at her watch. The license restriction took full legal effect at 9 this morning when the divorce was finalized. Titan's board will need to be informed. Investor calls will begin when the market moves on the news of the architectural freeze. Timing is a consideration. Daniel said under his breath, Jason. And there was something in Daniel's voice that Jason had never heard there before. Fear. Not for himself, for Jason. The kind of fear a loyal person feels when they watch someone they've served for 9 years walk into a wall they could not see coming and cannot now avoid. Jason Morgan sat in a 32nd floor boardroom in Chicago, surrounded by the evidence of his own dismantling, and he made a decision. Not the right one. Not yet. He stood up. We're done for today, he said. Richard, get your team on the license agreement tonight. I want a full analysis by morning. Daniel, call the board. Don't tell them anything yet. Just get them available. We'll reconvene tomorrow. He picked up his jacket. Emily did not move. She watched him prepare to leave with an expression of absolute patience, and that patience was somehow worse than any expression of victory would have been. This isn't over, Jason said to the room. Emily said quietly, I know you believe that. He left. The elevator ride down was 32 floors of silence. Richard was already on his phone. Daniel stared at the floor numbers. No one spoke. Jason stood in the center of the elevator and felt the full weight of the past 14 months pressing down on him. All those ordinary mornings, all those kitchen silences, all those times he had watched Emily move through their shared life with that calm, unhurried quality that he had always interpreted as passivity, as acceptance, as the particular quietude of a woman who had accepted that the terms of their life were his to set. He had been so certain. He had been so completely, catastrophically certain. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Jason Morgan walked out into the building's lobby and through the revolving door onto Wacker Drive, and the Chicago wind came off the river and hit him full in the face, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment before his car arrived. He was thinking about a Tuesday in November. He was thinking about a woman who woke up at 5:45 this morning and dressed in charcoal gray and signed every page of a document without hesitation. And he was thinking about how long you have to have known something before you can do that. Before you can sit across from the person who has spent 2 years building a cage around you and sign your name to their plan and feel nothing but finished. He had thought her silence was surrender. He understood now on the sidewalk in the wind that her silence had been architecture. She had been building something in it every day for 14 months, and he had handed her the time to do it. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He answered it anyway. "Mr. Morgan," said a voice he didn't know. "I'm calling from the Wall Street Journal. We've received information about a licensing dispute involving Titan Systems' core software architecture. Would you like to comment before we go to print?" Jason closed his eyes, and the ground, which had been shifting since that moment on the courthouse steps when a black Maybach pulled up and Thomas Croft did not look at him, finished moving. And there was nothing underneath it. The Wall Street Journal reporter's name was Karen Mills, and she had been covering technology and corporate litigation for 11 years, which meant she had a particular instinct for when a story was larger than it appeared on the surface. This one, she had decided approximately 40 minutes ago, when the tip came through, was significantly larger than it appeared. Jason told her no comment and hung up. He stood on the sidewalk for exactly 3 seconds, then called Richard Voss. Richard picked up on the first ring, which told Jason that Richard was already worried, because Richard was a man who let calls from clients ring twice as a matter of professional composure. "The Journal has it," Jason said. A pause. "How?" "That's what I need you to find out in the next 20 minutes. Jason's car pulled up. He got in, closed the door. "And I need you to tell me honestly, Richard, not as my lawyer trying to manage me, but honestly, how bad is the license issue?" Another pause, longer this time. "Richard, I need to read the full agreement before I can give you a definitive, give me your instinct." Richard Voss was quiet for 4 seconds. 4 full seconds, which was for a man like Richard, the legal equivalent of a scream. "It's bad," Richard said. "If the license clause is what she says it is, and the notice was properly served 14 months ago, then Titan has been operating in technical violation of its core software agreement for over a year. That affects every contract signed in that period, every partnership, every investor representation." Jason said nothing. "Jason, every investor representation." "I heard you. That's not just a licensing dispute, that's potentially—" "I know what it is," Jason said. His voice was flat. "Get me the full analysis, tonight." He hung up and looked out the window at Chicago, and he thought about Emily's face across that table, and he thought about the word that Richard had not said, but that had been sitting underneath every word he did say. Fraud. Not Emily's. His 13 months of investor pitches and partnership agreements and licensing deals, all of them built on a foundation that Emily had quietly pulled out from under him 14 months ago, and he had not known, and not knowing was not in securities law a defense. His phone rang. His CFO. He answered. "The board," Daniel said without preamble. "Two of them already know. Marcus called me 5 minutes ago. He'd seen something on a financial newswire, a preliminary item vague, but he knew enough to call. Jason Marcus is panicking." Marcus Webb was Titan's lead independent director. He was also, Jason knew, the kind of man who panicked by getting very quiet and very legal very fast. "Tell Marcus I'll call him in an hour," Jason said. "He said he needs to hear from you in 30 minutes, or he's convening an emergency board session." Jason closed his eyes briefly. "Fine, 30 minutes. He hung up and sat in the moving car and did something he almost never did. He let himself feel the full weight of what was happening without immediately trying to manage it. It lasted approximately 8 seconds. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person who was not his lawyer, not his CFO, not a board member, not a reporter, not a problem to be solved, his brother. Kevin Morgan was 3 years younger than Jason, lived in Denver, ran a mid-sized construction company, and had spent most of his adult life in the comfortable shadow of his older brother's enormous success. He was not particularly sophisticated about finance or law or corporate structure. He was, however, the only person Jason trusted to tell him something true without calculating what it cost them first. Kevin answered on the third ring. "Hey, thought you had court today." "I did," Jason said. "It's done." "How'd it go?" "The divorce went fine." Jason paused. "Everything else is Kevin. I need you to just listen for a minute." There was a shift in Kevin's voice immediately. The easy tone dropped. "Okay, I'm listening." Jason talked for 4 minutes. He kept it factual. He left out the emotional texture, the courthouse steps, the Maybach, the boardroom, Emily's face. He gave Kevin the structure of it, the license agreement, the 14 months Vanguard's debt position, the journal call. When he finished, Kevin was quiet for a moment. "So she had this whole thing planned," Kevin said, "for 14 months. "Yes." "While you were still living in the same house?" "Yes." Another silence. Then Kevin said carefully, the way someone says something they have been holding for a while, "Jason, can I say something without you getting defensive?" "No," Jason said. "Then, yes, say it." "Did she build that software, the core thing? Did she actually write it?" Jason looked out the window. A long moment passed. "Yes," he said. "Then, brother—" Kevin stopped. Started again. "I love you, you know that. But you've been telling the story of Titan Systems for 11 years and her name is never in it. I've heard you give interviews. I've heard you give toasts at your own company dinners. You built Titan Systems, Jason. That's the story you tell. Is that—" Another careful pause. "Is that actually true?" Jason said nothing. "Jason." "She was part of the early team," Jason said, and even as he said it, he heard how it sounded, and he heard how it had always sounded, and he heard the specific gap between what those words said and what was true. Kevin's silence on the other end of the line was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was the silence of someone who loves you and is watching you and cannot help you with the particular thing you need help with right now, which is yourself. "Okay," Kevin said finally. "What do you need from me?" "I don't know," Jason said. And that perhaps was the most honest thing he had said all day. He arrived at his office at 4:17 in the afternoon. His assistant met him in the lobby with a tablet showing 17 messages flagged urgent, which was the kind of number that usually energized Jason. He was at his core, a man who performed best under pressure, who had built his entire identity around the ability to absorb chaos and emit control. Today, the 17 messages just looked like 17 open wounds. He went through them in order. 3 board members, 2 senior investors, his PR firm, his personal attorney, different from Richard, the one who handled his personal liability exposure, 2 journalists, one of them from the Financial Times, and 6 from various Titan Systems executives who had apparently seen enough of the financial newswire to understand that something was happening, but not enough to understand what. He answered none of them immediately. He sat at his desk and he pulled up Titan Systems' original incorporation documents, the ones from 11 years ago, the original filing, the one that listed both his name and Emily's in the founder section, and he read them for the first time in a very long time. He read his own signature. He read hers below his. Emily Carter, co-founder, smaller than his in the physical space of the page because she had always taken up less space than him in every physical and metaphorical room, not because she had less to offer, but because he had unconsciously arranged things so that she did. He thought about a Saturday morning 9 years ago when they had appeared together on a local Chicago business program, a small show, early days before Titan was nationally known, and the host had asked Emily to describe her role in the company, and Jason had leaned forward and answered before she could, and Emily had sat back and let him, and he had not noticed that he had done it until right now sitting at his desk reading her signature. 9 years ago. He had been doing it for 9 years, and he had not noticed once. His desk phone rang. His assistant, Marcus Webb, on the line. He says it's been 32 minutes. "Put him through," Jason said. Marcus Webb's voice was controlled in the specific way of a man who has spent the last 30 minutes with corporate attorneys. "Jason, tell me this is manageable." "I'm working on it," Jason said. "That is not the sentence I needed to hear." Marcus's composure slipped slightly just at the edges. "I've had Dawson and Frick on the phone for 20 minutes. They're talking about fiduciary exposure. They're talking about the investor representations we made in the Series D round. Jason, if the software architecture was under a revocable license, and we represented to investors that Titan held clear title to its core technology. I know what we represented, Jason said. Then you know what you're looking at. Marcus, give me until tomorrow morning. I'm in discussions with the license holder. There may be a resolution that... The license holder, Marcus said slowly, is your ex-wife. Yes. A very long pause. Jason. Marcus's voice had dropped to something almost private. I've been on this board for 6 years. I've watched you build something remarkable, but I need you to be very honest with me right now because what I do next depends on it. Did you know about this license clause when we made those representations to investors? Jason's hand tightened on the phone. It was a question with only 2 answers, and both of them were terrible. If he said yes, he had known and concealed it, that was fraud. Deliberate, prosecutable fraud. If he said no, he had not known which was the truth, then he was a CEO who did not know the foundational legal structure of his own company's core technology, which was a different kind of catastrophic. No, Jason said. I did not know. Another silence. All right, Marcus said. Then we have a problem, but not a crime. I'll hold the board meeting until tomorrow morning. 8 a.m., Jason be there. And for God's sake, resolve this tonight if you can. The call ended. Jason sat at his desk, and he thought about the word crime, and he thought about the word resolution, and he thought about Emily sitting across a table from him saying, I'm protecting what's mine, with the same quiet, absolute certainty she had said everything today, everything for 14 months, everything perhaps for years before that in ways he had not been paying attention to. He picked up his phone and called the one number he had not yet called. Emily answered on the second ring. She said, I wondered when you'd call. We need to talk, he said. Not through lawyers, not in a conference room. You and me. A pause. Why? Because I need to understand something, he said. Another pause. Longer. All right, she said. My office. 7 o'clock. He had not known she had an office. That was the first thing that struck him, the simple, concrete fact that Emily had an office somewhere in Chicago, and he did not know where it was, had never known where it was, because in the architecture of his thinking, she had not been the kind of person who had an office that he would need to know the address of. She texted him the address after she hung up. It was 6 blocks from Titan Systems headquarters. She had been 6 blocks away building something for he did not know how long. Long enough. He arrived at 7 exactly. The building was not impressive by the standards of Chicago commercial real estate mid-size professional, the kind of address that belongs to companies that are serious about their work and indifferent to appearances. He took the elevator to the 9th floor and found the office, and the door was open, and Emily was at her desk when he walked in. The office was clean, uncluttered. One framed document on the wall. He looked at it as he came in and saw that it was the Delaware Incorporation Certificate for EC Technologies, LLC, dated 13 years ago, 2 years before they met. He stood in front of it for a moment. You started EC Technologies before you met me, he said. I started it when I finished the software, she said. I was 25. I had been working on that architecture for 2 years. I wasn't going to let it exist without a legal home. He turned from the certificate. She was watching him from her desk, her hands folded in front of her, her expression neither welcoming nor hostile. Sit down, Jason, she said. He sat. There was a silence between them that was different from the silences of the last 14 months. Those had been silences of concealment, hers protecting something his unaware. This silence was open, raw in the way that things become raw when the pretense is finally gone. How long, though, he said, did you know what I was doing? She considered the question. I suspected for about 2 years. I confirmed it 14 months ago. The laptop. The laptop, she said. He leaned forward and put his elbows on his knees and his hands over his face briefly, then pulled them away. And you said nothing. What would I have said? Her voice was not unkind. It was honest. If I had confronted you that night, you would have responded the way you respond to every challenge you would have escalated. You would have used every resource you had to contain the situation, and I would have been fighting you from a position of nothing. You had already restructured the ownership. You had already buried the offshore accounts. You had already turned Titan's legal team into your personal defense structure. She paused. I needed time more than I needed to be right. He looked at her. So you just lived there, in that house, for 14 months, knowing? Yes. How? He said. And it was a genuine question stripped of everything performative, just a man trying to understand something he could not understand. How did you do that? Emily was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been all day. Because I had already grieved you, she said. Not on the night I found out. Before that. A long time before that. When you stopped saying my name in interviews. When you started referring to the early team like I was one of a group instead of what I actually was. When I realized you had rewritten the story of Titan so many times that you had actually started to believe your own version of it. The words landed somewhere specific and stayed there. That's when I started grieving, she said. By the time I found the laptop, I had already been gone for a long time. I just needed to finish leaving. Jason was very still. Emily, he said. And then he stopped because whatever was going to follow that word was something he had not said in so long that the path to it had almost grown over. He tried again. I need to tell you that His phone rang. He looked at it. His PR firm. He silenced it. It rang again immediately. Richard Voss. He silenced it again. Then it rang a third time, and the number was Daniel Fraze, and Daniel never called 3 times, which meant something had happened. He looked at Emily. I'm sorry, 1 second. He answered. Daniel, I'm in the middle of... Jason. Daniel's voice was tight and strange. The story broke. The journal went live 20 minutes ago. It's not just the license. Karen Mills got the offshore account structure, the asset transfers, all of it. A pause. Jason, they're calling it deliberate concealment of marital assets using corporate vehicles. They have documents. The room was very quiet. Jason looked at Emily across the desk. She was looking back at him, and her expression had not changed, and he understood in that moment with the sudden, terrible clarity of someone who has been slow to understand something obvious, that the Wall Street Journal did not find those documents on their own. Who gave them the documents? He said to Daniel. But he was looking at Emily when he said it. Daniel said, They're not saying. Jason, you need to get ahead of this tonight. The board is already... I'll call you back, Jason said, and ended the call. The silence in the office stretched between them. You gave them the documents, he said. She did not deny it. She did not confirm it. She simply held his gaze with that steady, undeflectable patience and said, The public has a right to accurate information about public companies. Emily. Something broke through in his voice, not anger, but something raw. This isn't you've destroyed the company, not just me. The employees, the people who work there who have nothing to do with what happened between us. I gave them information about what you did, she said clearly. What happens next is a consequence of what you did, not what I did. There's a difference. Yes, she said. There is always a difference between the action and the consequence. You spent 11 years making sure I understood that distinction from the losing side. She paused, and her voice softened slightly, just at the edges the way it does when someone says something they have thought about for a long time. The company doesn't have to be destroyed, Jason. That was never the goal. You have options. You have options right now tonight that could stabilize Titan, protect the employees, restore the public record. You have always had options. You chose the ones you chose. He stared at her. What options? She reached into her desk drawer and placed a document on the desk between them. It was the same document she had slid across the conference table 5 hours ago. The one he had walked away from. The same terms, she said. They haven't changed. Full attribution. Co-founder restoration. 40% equity to EC Technologies. Your public acknowledgement. She looked at him steadily. Sign this tonight, issue a joint statement with Vanguard by 9 a.m., and there is a version of tomorrow where Titan Systems is still standing and the people who work there still have jobs. Jason looked at the document. He thought about Marcus Webb and his word crime. He thought about Karen Mills and her 11 years of instinct. He thought about Richard Voss's 4 seconds of silence and what those seconds had contained. He thought about his brother Kevin asking him whether Emily had actually built the software and the 8-second pause before he answered yes. He picked up the document. He read it. He read it more carefully than he had read it in the conference room, because in the conference room he had still believed he had room to maneuver, room to fight, room to be Jason Morgan, who does not lose. He had believed that right up until Daniel's phone call, and now the belief was gone, and he was reading the document the way a person reads something real. When he finished, he set it down. "If I sign this," he said, "what happens to the journal story?" "I can't control what the journal publishes," she said, "but what they publish will reflect what's true, and if what's true includes you acknowledging publicly and on record what actually happened and who actually built what, that changes the shape of the story considerably." He sat with that. His phone was vibrating continuously now, message after message, and he did not look at it. He kept his eyes on the document, and he thought about the courthouse this morning, about her signing those papers without hesitation, without tears, without any of the fight he had been braced for, and he understood, finally, completely, what that had been. She had not been surrendering. She had been finishing the first part of something that had a second part and a third part, and the second and third parts had been in motion for 14 months, and he had walked through all of it, morning after morning, kitchen after kitchen, without seeing any of it, because he had not been paying attention, because he had decided somewhere along the way that she was not the kind of person whose movements required his attention. He picked up the pen she had placed on the desk beside the document. He held it. "I need you to know something," he said. His voice was quiet. "I need you to know that I never thought of it as stealing. In my head, I built Titan. In my head, that was true. I know that's—" He stopped. "I know how that sounds." "I know," Emily said. "I know you believed it." She paused. "That's almost worse than if you'd known." He looked at her. "Because it means you didn't do it maliciously," she said. "You did it because you never thought hard enough about whether it was true, and I spent 11 years watching you not think about it, and every year I became a little less real in the story you were telling, and eventually—" She stopped. When she continued, her voice was level, but not cold. "Eventually I was nothing, and you believed it." He signed the document. He signed it the way she had signed the divorce papers that morning, without theatrical pause, without resistance. Just a pen moving across a page, sealing something that needed to be sealed. He set the pen down. He looked up at her. And Emily Carter, who had not cried in 14 months, who had moved through this entire day with the composure of someone who had already done all her feeling in private, looked at the signed document for a long moment, and something moved very briefly across her face. Not triumph, not satisfaction, not relief. Something quieter and more complicated than any of those things. Something that looked, if Jason was reading it correctly, like the specific sadness of finishing something that should never have had to be finished. "Thank you," she said, quietly, plainly. He nodded. He stood, picked up his jacket, and walked to the door of her office. He stopped there with his hand on the frame and said without turning around, "For what it's worth, what you built, the software, the architecture, it was the best work I've ever seen. I knew it when you wrote it. He stopped. "I just forgot to keep knowing it." Emily said nothing. He walked out. The elevator doors closed behind him, and he stood inside it alone, descending, and he held very still and breathed. And for the first time in this very long day, Jason Morgan felt something that was not strategy, not calculation, not the managed pressure of a man running a crisis. He felt the specific weight of what you carry when you have finally told the truth about something. It was heavier than he expected. And it did not go away when the elevator reached the ground floor, and it did not go away when he stepped out onto the street, and it would not. He suspected go away for a very long time. Above him, on the 9th floor, Emily sat at her desk and looked at the signed document. She picked up her phone and called Patricia. "It's done," she said. Patricia said, "All of it. All of it." A pause. "How do you feel?" Emily looked at the Delaware Incorporation certificate on her wall. EC Technologies, LLC, her name, her company, the legal home she had built for her work when she was 25 years old and already paying attention. "Like I got something back," she said. "You did," Patricia said. "You got everything back." Emily set the phone down. She sat alone in her office in the Chicago night, and she thought about what came next. Not revenge, not victory, not the clean cinematic closure that stories are supposed to deliver. What came next was work, her company, her name on the things she had built. And for the first time in a very long time, the future felt like something that belonged to her. The Wall Street Journal story went live at 6:47 in the morning. By 7:15, it had been shared 40,000 times. By 7:30, Titan Systems stock had dropped 11% before the opening bell, and 3 separate financial news networks were running crawlers at the bottom of their screens with Jason Morgan's name in them. Jason had not slept. He had gone home from Emily's office the previous night, sat at his kitchen table with a glass of water he never touched, and spent 6 hours on the phone with Richard, with his personal attorney, with his PR firm, with Marcus Webb twice, with Daniel Frey 3 times, and finally at 2 in the morning with Thomas Croft's office arranging the framework for the joint statement that Emily had described as the difference between a Titan Systems that still existed tomorrow and one that didn't. The joint statement went out at 6 a.m., 30 minutes before the Journal story broke. It was Patricia Hales doing the timing specifically. She had understood that if the statement preceded the story even by minutes, the story's first paragraph would have to acknowledge it, and the first paragraph of a story determines more than anything else how the story is read. The statement was 4 paragraphs. It acknowledged Emily's role as co-architect of Titan Systems' foundational software. It confirmed the transfer of 40% equity to EC Technologies. It announced a restructured partnership with Vanguard Holdings. And it carried in the 3rd paragraph a sentence that Jason had written himself at 1 in the morning that read, "The success of Titan Systems was built on a foundation that I did not build alone." And the public record should reflect that truth accurately and completely. It was the hardest sentence he had ever written. He knew it the moment he typed it. Not because it was difficult to construct, it was 9 words and a clause, but because of what it cost him to let it be true in public in print permanently in a way that could never be walked back. He sent it to Patricia at 1:14 a.m. without asking Richard to review it first, because he knew that if Richard reviewed it, Richard would soften it, and it needed to be exactly what it was. Patricia had replied within 3 minutes. "This is right. I'll make sure she sees it." He did not know if Emily had seen it before she went to sleep that night. He did not ask. He arrived at Titan Systems headquarters at 7:45, 15 minutes before the board meeting. The lobby felt different than it always had. Same building, same marble, same security desk, same elevator bank, but with the particular atmospheric charge that large institutions carry when something fundamental about them is in the process of changing. People moved through it at the same pace as always, and they said good morning to each other, as always. And underneath all of it was the hum of something that could not quite be named yet. Daniel was waiting for him outside the boardroom. He looked like a man who had also not slept, but who had used the sleeplessness more productively than Jason Daniels' sleeplessness, produced tidy stacks of organized documents and a very precise accounting of where things stood. "Stock is down 14% as of 5 minutes ago," Daniel said, falling into step beside him. 3 institutional investors have called this morning. 2 are waiting. 1 sold overnight and after-hours trading small position, but it'll get reported. "Who?" "Patterson Group. They were never true believers anyway." "Who's in the room?" "All 7 board members. Marcus got there early. He brought outside counsel Hendricks from Meridian, the firm they use for special committee work. Jason, that means Marcus is thinking about whether the board needs to act independently of management," Jason said. "I know what it means." Daniel was quiet for a step. "How do you want to handle it?" Jason stopped walking. He turned to look at Daniel, really look at him the way he had not looked at many people closely in a long time, because looking closely at people is something you do when you believe their perceptions of you matter. Daniel Frey was 52. He had joined Titan when it was 30 employees and a rented floor in a building considerably less impressive than this one. He had stayed through every iteration, every growth phase, every difficult quarter. He had never asked Jason for anything except the information he needed to do his job, and he had always done his job well, and Jason had rewarded him well for it, which was the full extent of what Jason had thought about Daniel Frey's experience of working for him. Now looking at him in the corridor outside the boardroom, Jason thought about whether Daniel had known, whether any of them had known about the asset transfers, the offshore structures, the slow erasure of Emily from the company's history, and had simply kept their heads down, because that was how careers survived in proximity to powerful men. "Daniel," he said, "did you know about any of it? The restructuring, the what I did with the asset transfers?" Daniel met his eyes. A moment passed. "I knew some of it was aggressive," he said carefully. "I didn't ask the questions that would have told me more." It was an honest answer, more honest than Jason deserved. "Okay," Jason said. "Thank you for that." He straightened his jacket. "Let's go in." Marcus Webb was seated at the head of the table, which was itself a statement. Marcus was lead independent director, which meant he had the authority to call an independent session to direct outside counsel to take actions that did not require Jason's participation. Sitting at the head of the table was Marcus communicating without words that he had considered using that authority and had not yet decided against it. The outside counsel Hendricks sat beside Marcus. The other 6 board members arranged themselves around the table with the carefully neutral expressions of people who were paying very close attention to everything while committing to nothing. Jason sat. He did not take the head of the table. He sat at the side, which was a choice, and everyone in the room registered it. "Thank you all for being here," Jason said. "I know the timeline was compressed. I'll be direct about what happened, what I've done to address it, and where we are as of this morning." He talked for 12 minutes. He did not use notes. He did not soften the sequence of events. He explained the license clause, the 14 months Vanguard's debt position, the meeting at Wacker, and the document he had signed in Emily's office the previous night. He explained his reasoning for signing without board consultation. He knew it would be questioned, and he got there first, explaining that the window for stabilization was hours, not days, and that consulting a 7-person board while a licensing crisis and a media story were both in motion was not a window that existed. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Marcus said, "You signed a 40% equity transfer without board approval." "I did," Jason said. "The authority to make that transfer exists within my executive mandate under the current corporate charter. Richard has confirmed that. It's aggressive use of that authority, and I'm aware of the board's right to review it." "We'll be reviewing it," Marcus said, flat, final. "I expected that," Jason said. Hendricks, the outside counsel, leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, I want to be clear about something. The board's primary concern this morning is not the equity structure. The equity structure is addressable. The primary concern is the investor representations made during the Series D round in the context of what we now know about the license agreement, specifically whether those representations were made in good faith." "They were made in ignorance," Jason said. "I did not know about the license clause at the time of the Series D. I have said that to my attorney, I've said it to Marcus, and I'm saying it to you and to this board on the record. I did not know." "You should have known," Hendricks said. "The CEO of a technology company should have full knowledge of the legal status of his core technology." "Yes," Jason said. "I should have." The simplicity of the agreement stopped Hendricks for a half-second. He had been prepared for deflection. He received none. "The fact that I didn't know," Jason continued, "is a governance failure. It's my governance failure. I'm not asking the board to absorb it. I'm asking the board to let me fix what can be fixed and to deal with what can't be fixed through appropriate process." Marcus studied him. "What's your read on the stock?" "It'll be down 20% by end of day," Jason said, "possibly 25. It will stabilize when the market processes the joint statement and understands the Vanguard partnership. Vanguard's involvement is a positive signal Thomas Croft does not put his name on failing enterprises. By end of week, I think we're looking at a 15% permanent adjustment that reflects a more accurate valuation of the company's actual architecture and IP situation. That is not fatal. 15% permanent loss of market cap. One of the other board members, a woman named Sandra Alcafor, who ran a fund and had always been the most analytically precise person in any room she occupied, said, "On current valuation, that's approximately $800 million. "Yes," Jason said, "because you didn't know your own company's foundational IP status." "Yes." Sandra Alcafor looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus. The room breathed. Marcus said, "I wanted to speak with the board in private session. Jason, give us 30 minutes. Jason stood. He picked up his coffee, which he had not touched, and walked out of the boardroom, and the door closed behind him. He stood in the corridor. Daniel was at the far end near the elevators looking at his phone. Jason walked toward him slowly. "How bad?" Daniel said without looking up. "They're deciding whether to ask for my resignation," Jason said. Daniel looked up. His expression was the particular expression of someone receiving information they had already calculated the probability of. "What are your odds?" 50-50, Jason said. "Marcus wants to keep the company stable. Asking me to resign this morning creates a second crisis on top of the first one. But Sandra is going to push for accountability. She'll frame it as you can't have a governance failure of this magnitude without a consequence at the top." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "Would you go if they asked?" It was a question that required a different kind of honesty than the boardroom had required. The boardroom required the honesty of facts. This required the honesty of self-knowledge. Jason thought about it seriously. He stood in the corridor of a company he had built, that he and Emily had built, and he thought about what it would mean to leave it. Not as a theoretical loss, not as a pride wound, but as an actual concrete change in the shape of his life. "I don't know," he said. "A week ago I would have said no. A week ago I would have said over my dead body." He paused. "Today I'm less certain about what I'm entitled to." Daniel nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, and I know it's probably not worth much right now, I think the company has a better future than it looks like this morning. The Vanguard partnership is real. The technology is real. The software architecture that Emily built is extraordinary. And now that it's properly attributed and licensed, the structure is actually cleaner than it was before. We were building on sand, now we're building on rock." Jason looked at him. "You're trying to make me feel better." "I'm trying to give you accurate information," Daniel said. "Same thing I've been doing for 9 years. A pause. "Though I'll admit this morning it happens to also be the comforting thing." Jason almost smiled. It didn't quite reach his face, but it was adjacent to a smile, which was more than he had managed all morning. His phone buzzed, a number he didn't recognize. He looked at it. Then he looked at it again. The area code was San Francisco. He did not know anyone in San Francisco currently, except he ran through his mental contact list quickly, except for the CEO of Meridian Tech, a company he had been in early-stage acquisition conversations with for 4 months. Conversations that were technically in a delicate enough state that a 14% stock drop and a Wall Street Journal story about governance failure could detonate them entirely. He answered, "Jason Morgan." "Jason." The voice was careful and professional in the way that voices are careful and professional when they are about to say something that the speaker has rehearsed. "It's David Chen. I wanted to call you directly rather than through the bankers." "David," Jason said. His voice was level. "I appreciate that. I've seen the journal piece and the joint statement. I want to be honest with you, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve a managed message right now." "I'm listening," Jason said. "The acquisition conversation needs to pause," David said. "Not end pause. Our board met this morning on an emergency call. The IP attribution issue changes the due diligence picture significantly, and we need to understand the new equity structure before we can responsibly continue." "That's fair," Jason said. A beat of silence. "Jason, I've known you for 8 years. I know what you built. I also read that statement you put out this morning, the line about not building it alone. That took something." Another pause. "When the dust settles, call me. I think there's still a conversation to have." "Thank you, David," Jason said. The call ended. He stood with the phone in his hand and thought about what David Chen had just done. David had not needed to call personally. He could have had his banker call Jason's banker with a polite pause message that communicated the same information with none of the personal weight. He had called personally because the statement Jason had written at 1 a.m. had changed something about how David Chen saw him. Not fixed it, not repaired the damage, but changed something. It was a small thing, but it was real. The boardroom door opened at 9:22. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Come back in," he said. Jason walked back into the room. The board's faces had rearranged themselves during the 30 minutes of private session into something more settled, the faces of people who have made a decision and are prepared to deliver it. Marcus sat, Jason sat. "The board is not asking for your resignation," Marcus said, "at this time." The qualifier landed with its full weight. "What we are doing is establishing a special oversight committee of 3 independent directors to review all executive decisions above a certain threshold for the next 18 months. You will operate with their approval on any material transaction. That committee will have full access to all corporate records, all legal agreements, all financial structures." He paused. "This is not optional." "I understand," Jason said. "Sandra has additional remarks." Sandra Okafor looked at him directly. She was not unfriendly. She was precise. "The governance failure here was extraordinary, Jason. I want you to understand that what we're doing today, keeping you in the seat, is a decision we are making for the company's employees and shareholders, not for you. There are 800 people who work here who did nothing wrong. Replacing the CEO this morning would not serve them. But in 18 months, when we evaluate where we are, if this committee has any reason whatsoever to question your judgment or your transparency, we will revisit this decision and we will not hesitate." "Are we understood?" "Completely," Jason said. Sandra nodded. "One more thing. The public statement you issued this morning, the line about not building this alone. I want to know whether your PR team wrote that." "No," Jason said. "I wrote it." She held his gaze for a moment. Something shifted slightly in her expression, not softening exactly but adjusting, the way a precise instrument adjusts when it receives new data. "All right," she said. "Then we have somewhere to start." The meeting ended at 9:51. Jason walked out of the boardroom with his position intact and his authority conditional, and his company altered in ways that would take months to fully understand. He went to his office, closed the door, and sat at his desk. He looked at his phone. 7 missed calls from journalists, 14 messages from various contacts in the industry, ranging from sympathetic to curious to nakedly opportunistic. 2 from people who wanted to discuss his situation in ways that would ultimately benefit them. And 1 message sent at 9:38, while the board meeting was still in session, from Emily. It said, "The Journal updated their story with the joint statement. They're framing it as a restructuring rather than a scandal. I thought you should know." He read it twice. Then he typed back, "Thank you for telling me." She replied 40 seconds later, "The people who work at Titan, they didn't do anything wrong. I never wanted this to hurt them." He sat with that message for a long moment. Then he typed, "I know, I don't think it will, not long term." A longer pause this time. Then, "Good." That was the end of the exchange. He set the phone down. He thought about 800 people who came into this building every day because they believed in the work, and he thought about how much of what they were building on had always been Emily's, even when her name wasn't on it. And he thought about the 12 years in which he had watched her recede from the story he told until she was invisible. And he thought about how a person can do something like that, can erase someone with such gradual, confident carelessness and genuinely believe the whole time that they are the protagonist. That was the thing about Jason Morgan's particular kind of blindness. It was not malice, it was certainty. The certainty of a man who had never seriously considered that his version of events might not be the accurate one, because why would it not be? He was the one telling it. He had been so certain. He had been certain in the courthouse, certain in the conference room on Walker, certain on the sidewalk when he watched the Maybach drive away and told himself it was nothing. The certainty was gone now. It had been replaced by something that was uncomfortable and unfamiliar, and he was beginning to suspect necessary. The feeling of not knowing, of having to look at a situation without the automatic assumption that his reading of it was correct. He did not know if he would be good at that. He had not practiced it, but he was going to have to try. His desk phone rang. His assistant. "Mr. Morgan, there's a call from someone at MIT. A professor, Dr. Anita Reyes. She says she's calling about the Emily Carter attribution story and would like to comment for their alumni communications. She says Emily is a graduate." Jason stopped. "Emily went to MIT. A brief pause. "That's what the caller says, sir. She says Emily Carter graduated from their computer science program and was apparently one of their most distinguished students. They're issuing a statement about her today." Jason sat very still. In 12 years of marriage, he had known that Emily was technically talented. He had known she was intelligent. He had known on the level where you know things about people you live with that she was capable. He had not known she had graduated from MIT. He had not known because he had never asked. He had met her when she was 27 with the software already written, and he had taken the software and the talent and the capability and incorporated all of it into his own momentum and never stopped to ask what had made her. He had not asked because he had not been curious enough to ask. He thought about Sandra Okafor's phrase from 20 minutes ago, somewhere to start. He thought about what it would take concretely, specifically, not in the abstract way of people who commit to changing at moments of crisis, and then find the commitment dissolving when the crisis fades, to actually become a person who asked those questions, who paid attention, who did not wait until the cost of not paying attention was catastrophic before learning what he had been looking at all along. He picked up the phone. "Put Dr. Reyes through," he said, "and then clear my afternoon." His assistant paused. "Clear it for what, sir?" "I don't know yet," Jason said. "Just clear it." Dr. Reyes was warm, direct, and clearly someone who had followed Emily's career with genuine pride. She said that Emily had been one of their most exceptional computer science graduates in the past 20 years. She said the software architecture that was now being publicly attributed to Emily was, in the opinion of the faculty members who had reviewed it, a landmark piece of work, the kind that came along once every decade or so. She said MIT was proud. She said they intended to say so. Jason listened. When she finished, he said, "Dr. Reyes, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said. "Did she always know it was landmark?" he said. "When she was writing it, did she know what she had?" A pause. Then Dr. Reyes said, "I think she knew it was good. I don't think she knew how good, because that kind of self-knowledge usually requires someone else to tell you." Another pause. That's often the tragedy of exceptional people who work alongside people who don't recognize them. They start to doubt what they know. Jason held that sentence in his mind for a long time after the call ended. He sat at his desk in the quiet of a cleared afternoon, and he thought about a 25-year-old woman incorporating a Delaware LLC to protect software she had written herself, because she was already paying attention in ways that most people never learn to. He thought about a 27-year-old sitting across from a man at a business meeting and deciding to bet on what they could build together. He thought about all the years between that moment and this one, and the slow, invisible cost of being seen as less than you are by the person standing closest to you. And he thought about the words Dr. Reyes had just used. Usually requires someone else to tell you. He had had 12 years. He had spent them telling himself instead. He picked up his phone. He opened the message thread with Emily. He looked at the last exchange, her good. Him, nothing after that. He started typing. He deleted it. Started again. He typed, "I found out today that you went to MIT. I don't know how I didn't know that. I'm not asking you to respond to this. I just want you to know that I know it now. And I know that knowing it now instead of 12 years ago says something about me that I'm going to have to live with." He sat with his finger over the send button for a long time. Then he pressed it. He set the phone face down on his desk, and he looked at the cleared afternoon in front of him, and he breathed. Across the city, in a 9th-floor office, 6 blocks from here, Emily Carter's phone lit up on her desk. She looked at the message. She read it once, and then again, and then she set the phone down and went back to the document she had been working on, a new software development proposal, EC Technologies letterhead, her name at the top, and she did not reply. Not because she had nothing to say, but because some things, when they come too late, are not answered. They are simply received. And that for now was enough. Emily did not reply to Jason's message that night. She did not reply the following morning either, and not because she hadn't read it. She had read it 4 times the last time at 6 a.m., while standing in her kitchen with her coffee getting cold, but because she understood something that Jason was still learning, which was that an acknowledgement delivered after the damage is done is not an apology. It is a reckoning, and reckonings do not require a response. They require time and witness, and the willingness to sit with what you've done without being rescued from it by the other person's forgiveness. She let him sit with it. She had things to do. The week following the divorce and the board meeting and the journal story was the busiest week of Emily Carter's professional life, which was saying something because she had spent 2 years in a basement office writing software that would eventually become the foundation of a billion-dollar company, while also managing a household and a marriage and her own invisible grief, and that had not been a slow week either. Thomas Croft called her at 8 a.m. on Wednesday. "The Vanguard board reviewed the restructured agreement this morning," he said without preamble, because Thomas Croft was not a man who used preambles. "They've approved full execution. EC Technologies has 40% of Titan Clean registered public. Your name is on it." Emily stood at her office window and felt something move through her that was quiet and deep and did not have a simple name. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "You built the thing. I just helped you get back what was yours." A pause, and then in a different register, warmer, less boardroom. "How are you, Emily, actually?" She thought about the question honestly. "I feel like someone who just finished running a very long race," she said. "I'm not sure yet if I'm celebrating or just stopped." Thomas made a sound that was between a laugh and an acknowledgement. "That's what winning feels like when it took too long," he said. "Give it a few days. It'll shift." He was right, though the shift did not come in the form she expected. On Thursday morning, she received an email from a woman named Grace Hendricks, no relation to the outside counsel from the board meeting, who was 24 years old, 2 years out of Carnegie Mellon's computer science program, and was currently working as a junior developer at a mid-sized tech firm in Chicago, whereas Grace's email described it with careful and measured understatement. Her contributions were consistently attributed to her senior colleagues. The email was 3 paragraphs. It was articulate and specific and had clearly been rewritten several times before being sent. It ended with, "I read about what you did, what you built, and how you protected it, and I just needed to tell someone who would understand that this matters, that knowing it's possible to build something that can't be taken from you that matters to people like me." Emily read the email twice. Then she called Patricia. "I need to do something," she said. "You're already doing several things," Patricia said. "Something else, something that isn't about me." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know exactly yet," Emily said. "But there are a lot of Grace Hendrickses out there. Women who are building things right now in rooms with people who are going to take credit for those things, and they don't have a Patricia Hale, and they don't have Thomas Croft, and they don't have 14 months of runway to plan a countermove. Most of them just lose, quietly, and nobody writes a Wall Street Journal story about it." Patricia said nothing for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had something in it that was not quite pride, but was adjacent to it. "What would you need?" "Legal framework," Emily said. "For a foundation. IP protection specifically for early-stage women in tech. And," she paused thinking as she spoke, "a standard licensing agreement template. Something simple enough that a 24-year-old working her first job can understand it and use it before someone else uses her." "I can have a draft framework to you by Monday," Patricia said. "I know you can," Emily said. "That's why I called you." She spent Thursday afternoon in back-to-back calls with 3 women she had known peripherally over the years: a software engineer in Austin, a product architect in New York, a CTO in Seattle, each of whom had their own version of a story that rhymed uncomfortably with hers. She did not pitch them anything. She listened. She asked specific questions about what they had built and what they had lost and what they wished they had known at 25. She took notes in a yellow legal pad, longhand in the particular focused shorthand of someone gathering intelligence for something real. By Thursday evening, the outline of what would eventually become the Carter Foundation for Technology Equity existed in rough form on 4 pages of that legal pad. She did not know it yet, but it was already there. On Friday morning, Jason Morgan called. She let it go to voicemail. She listened to the voicemail in the afternoon. He said, "I know you don't owe me a conversation. I'm not calling to ask for one. I'm calling because Daniel told me this morning that 3 of our senior female engineers women who've been with the company for years put in requests to meet with HR about attribution and credit practices. He thinks it's a direct response to the journal story and the public statement. And I thought you should know that what you did is already changing things inside the company. I thought you'd want to know that." A pause. "That's all." She listened to the message twice, Then she put her phone in her bag and went to her next meeting. But she thought about those 3 engineers for the rest of the day. She thought about them the way you think about something that confirms something you already knew but needed confirmed, the way it settles in and becomes solid. The following Monday, 2 weeks after the divorce, Emily walked into a conference room at Vanguard Holdings for what the calendar had listed as a partnership structure review meeting. Thomas Croft was there as expected, his chief of staff as expected, 2 Vanguard attorneys. And across the table, unexpectedly, was a man named Robert Park, who was the founder and CEO of a company called Archbridge Systems, which was in the world of enterprise software infrastructure, the name that had been quietly considered the next significant competitor to Titan Systems for the past 3 years. Emily sat down. She looked at Thomas. Thomas said simply, "Robert has been following the EC Technology story. He has a proposal he wanted to bring directly to you." Robert Park was 41, Korean American, with the specific intensity of a person who builds things because they cannot imagine doing anything else. He leaned forward immediately because he was clearly not a man who used preambles either. "Ms. Carter," he said, "the architecture you built for Titan, I've been studying it for 2 years. My team has been studying it. It is in our assessment a decade ahead of everything else in the infrastructure space. Everything Titan built on top of it is ordinary. The foundation is extraordinary." He paused. "I want to license it." Emily looked at him. "For Archbridge?" "Or for a new entity," he said. "A joint venture. EC Technologies Architectural IP, Archbridge's development team, Vanguard's capital. We build the next generation platform. Not a competitor to Titan's, something different. Something that goes further." Emily was quiet for a moment. She looked at Thomas, who was watching her with the expression of a man who has arranged something he is reasonably confident about and is waiting to see if he was right. "Why didn't you approach me through intermediaries?" she said to Robert. "That's how these conversations usually start." "Because intermediaries would have taken 3 months to get to the actual question," he said. "And the actual question is simple. Do you want to build something new?" Emily sat back in her chair. She looked at the table for a moment, not because she was uncertain, but because she was being honest with herself about what she felt, which was something she had promised herself she would always do. What she felt was ready, not eager in the way of someone who has been waiting and is finally unleashed. Ready in the quieter way of someone who has been preparing for a long time and has arrived at the moment the preparation was for. "Tell me about the development team," she said. Robert talked for 20 minutes. He was specific, concrete, fluent with detail in the way that people who actually build things are fluent. He knew the technical landscape the way Emily knew it from inside, not from above. She interrupted him 4 times with questions that went considerably deeper than the overview he was presenting, and each time he answered without hesitation and without simplifying. And by the end of those 20 minutes, Emily had a clearer picture of Archbridge's actual capabilities than most investors got after a month of due diligence. "One condition," she said when he finished. "Name it," he said. "Every engineer on this project, every single one is credited publicly and specifically for what they contribute. Not team credit. Individual credit. Named, documented, legally registered to the specific person who did the work. Non-negotiable." Robert looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I run my company the same way. That's not a condition, Ms. Carter. That's just how we work." She looked at him. She looked at Thomas. She looked at the attorneys who were already beginning to arrange their papers. "All right," she said. "Let's build something." The meeting lasted another 3 hours. She walked out of Vanguard Holdings at 4:30 in the afternoon and stood on the sidewalk in the October Chicago air and called Patricia. "How was the meeting?" Patricia asked. "I'm going to need you to draft a joint venture agreement," Emily said, "and the foundation documents. Same week if possible." A pause. "Emily?" "I know," Emily said. "A lot at once." "That's not what I was going to say," Patricia said. "I was going to say I'm proud of you. I've been your attorney for 15 years. I've watched you make careful decisions in very hard circumstances for a very long time, and I want to say that out loud because I think you deserve to hear it said out loud." Emily stood on the sidewalk and felt something pass through her, quiet and warm and unfamiliar in its purity, because it was not relief, and it was not triumph, and it was not the satisfaction of a plan completed. It was something simpler, and rarer. It was the feeling of being seen accurately by someone who has known you long enough to mean it. "Thank you, Patricia," she said, and she meant it the way you mean things when they are true and specific and aimed at a real person. She walked to her car. She sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about a Tuesday evening 14 months ago when she had sat on the edge of a bathtub in a house that was partly hers and allowed herself 45 minutes of the kind of crying that does not make sound. She thought about the decision she had made when those 45 minutes were over, not the decision to fight exactly because fighting had not been the frame she chose, the decision to finish, to take back what was hers, not through anger but through patience, through precision, through the willingness to let time work in her direction for once. She thought about how many mornings she had made coffee in that kitchen, knowing what she knew, and said good morning to Jason, knowing what she knew, and moved through each day with the information of her own survival held quietly at the center of her like a compass. She had not known in those mornings whether it would work. She had known it was right. She had known the work was real, and the legal structure was sound, and Patricia was brilliant, and Thomas was trustworthy, and the software she had written at 25 was genuinely what she believed it was. She had known all of those things. But certainty about the quality of your work is not the same as certainty about the outcome, and there had been 14 months of living inside that distinction, knowing the work was worth fighting for, without knowing whether the fight would succeed, and that had required something from her that she did not have a simple name for. She had always called it patience, but it was more than that. It was the willingness to exist as the real version of yourself in a situation that was insisting you were someone smaller. It was the refusal to let someone else's story about you become your story about you. It was, she had said it to Jason, and she had meant every word of it, not revenge. It was recovery. Recovery of her work, recovery of her name, recovery of her own sense of what was true about herself. She started the car and drove home. 3 weeks later, the Carter Foundation for Technology Equity filed its incorporation documents in Delaware. Patricia had drafted them in 6 days, which was either a record or very close to one, and they were in Emily's assessment. Perfect, the kind of legal document that does what it intends to do without ambiguity or loophole or the particular kind of cleverness that eventually unravels. The Foundation's stated mission was simple: to provide legal resources, IP protection frameworks, and professional advocacy for women in technology whose intellectual contributions were at risk of misattribution. The board of directors included Patricia Thomas, Dr. Anita Reyes from MIT, and 3 women Emily had spoken to during that Thursday afternoon of phone calls. The Foundation's first public act was the release of a standard IP protection agreement, the one Emily had described to Patricia as something simple enough that a 24-year-old working her first job can understand it and use it. It was available for free download on the Foundation's website. In the first 48 hours, it was downloaded 11,000 times. Grace Hendricks, the 24-year-old from Carnegie Mellon who had sent that first email, sent another one when the download number was announced publicly. It said simply, 11,000, you have no idea. Emily replied to this one. She wrote, I have some idea. Then she hired Grace. The joint venture with Archbridge was announced publicly 6 weeks after the Vanguard meeting. It was named Foundry Emily's Choice, Robert's immediate approval, and its launch was covered not by the financial press, but by the technology press, which treated it differently, which was the point. The financial press covered who owned what. The technology press covered what was being built. Emily had spent enough time in the first category. She was interested in the second. The Foundry announcement generated something she had not anticipated, which was the specific kind of attention that comes when a story that people had filed under corporate drama reveals itself to be something else. Profiles were requested, interviews, an invitation to speak at a conference in San Francisco she had heard of but never attended, an invitation from MIT to return as a visiting lecturer, which she accepted immediately and without deliberation, because some things do not require deliberation. She said yes to some of it and no to most of it, applying the same principle she had applied to the 14 months, only the things that move the right direction. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, 7 weeks after the divorce, Jason Morgan appeared in the lobby of her building. Her assistant called up. There's a man named Jason Morgan in the lobby, Ms. Carter. He doesn't have an appointment. He says he's not here for a meeting. He says, A brief pause as the assistant apparently relayed the message verbatim. "He says he has something that belongs to you, and he'd like to return it." Emily sat at her desk for a moment. Then she said, "Send him up." He looked different than he had in the boardroom. Different than he had in the courthouse, different than he had in the Wacker conference room. He looked like a man who had been sleeping less and thinking more, which was a particular combination that sometimes produced something useful in people if they let it. He was carrying a document portfolio. He set it on her desk without sitting down. "I had our records department go back through the original development files," he said. "The code commits the version histories, the internal documentation from the first 3 years of Titan. I had them compile a complete technical attribution record, every line of the architecture, every design decision, who made it, and when." He paused. "Your name is on 93% of it. The remaining 7% is collaborative, and that's documented too." Emily looked at the portfolio. She did not open it immediately. "Why?" she said. "Because it's accurate," he said. "And because the public statement was right, but it was general. This is specific. This is the record that should have existed publicly 11 years ago and didn't, and I can't fix 11 years, but I can fix the record going forward." He paused again. "Our communications team is prepared to release it with whatever framing you think is appropriate, or none if you want it just as a legal and historical document. Your call. All of it, your call." Emily looked at him standing in her office. She thought about what it cost him to be standing there. Not in pride, she was past being interested in his pride, but in the simpler currency of effort. He had not sent an assistant. He had not had Richard Voss call Patricia. He had come himself carrying a document portfolio to a 9th-floor office that he had to look up the address of to return something he should never have taken. It was not enough. It was not close to enough in the arithmetic of what had happened between them. But it was real, and she had learned to give real things their proper weight without inflating or dismissing them. "Leave it," she said. "I'll review it and let you know." He nodded. He picked up his jacket from where he had set it on the chair he had not sat in. He moved toward the door, stopped. "The foundation," he said without turning around. "The Carter Foundation. I read about the download numbers. 11,000 in 48 hours. "Yes," she said. "I've been thinking about it," he said. "About what you said in your interview last week, that the problem isn't that women don't protect their work, it's that they don't always know they need to until it's too late." "That's what I said," Emily confirmed. He turned then, looked at her directly. "Titan Systems is going to make a donation to the foundation, a significant one. I've already spoken with the board and Sandra approved it." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm not asking for a statement or a photo or acknowledgement of any kind. It's just the right thing." Emily studied him. She was very good at reading people, she always had been, which was part of what had made those 14 months possible, and what she read in Jason Morgan's face right now was not performance. It was not strategic generosity. It was the specific, uncomfortable sincerity of someone doing something right for the first time in a long time and feeling for exactly that reason how unfamiliar it is. "I'll have Patricia send you the foundation's donation information," she said. "Thank you," he said. He walked out. The office was quiet when he left. Emily sat for a moment, and then she opened the document portfolio he had left on her desk. She turned to the first page. She looked at the technical attribution record. The code commits the version histories, the names and dates, and specific decisions that added up over the first 3 years of Titan Systems to the thing she had actually done. Her name, hundreds of times, in the precise, inarguable language of software development records. She sat with it. She did not feel vindicated exactly. Vindication implied she had been uncertain. She had never been uncertain about what she had built. What she felt was something quieter and more particular. The feeling of a thing being made legible that had always been true, but had not always been visible. The feeling of reality being corrected to match itself. She turned to the last page. At the bottom, in a section labeled Internal Notes, there was a single handwritten line in Jason's handwriting, not typed, not formatted, just written in the margin in the particular hard-angled script she recognized from 12 years of grocery lists and travel itineraries and birthday cards. It said, "She built this, all of it. I watched it happen, and I let myself forget." She sat with that for a long time. Then she closed the portfolio, set it in the corner of her desk where important things lived, and pulled her keyboard toward her and went back to work, because the work was what was real. The foundation grew. Foundry launched its first product 8 months after incorporation, and the architecture at its core was Emily's, and her name was on every public document related to it. And when technology journalists wrote about it, they wrote about Emily Carter, not as Jason Morgan's ex-wife, not as a footnote in someone else's story, but as the architect of something significant, the founder of something real. A woman who had spent 20 years building things and had finally, in the full public sense of the word, been seen doing it. The MIT lecture happened on a Friday in April. The auditorium held 400. There was a line outside before the doors opened. She spoke for 50 minutes about software architecture, about IP protection, about the specific kind of courage required to build something when you cannot yet see whether the building will be allowed to stand. She took questions for 30 minutes. A young woman in the fourth row, 22, maybe 23, with the particular focused attention of someone receiving information they intend to use, asked, "What would you tell yourself at 25, knowing everything you know now?" Emily thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "I would tell her that the work is real," she said, "that what she built is real, and real things do not disappear when someone tries to make them invisible. They wait. They are patient. And if you protect them correctly, and if you do not let someone else's certainty about your value replace your own, they survive." She paused. "I would tell her to incorporate the Delaware LLC and not to second-guess it. And I would tell her that the people who underestimate you are not your problem. They are their own problem. Your job is the work." The auditorium was quiet for a moment. Then it wasn't. She drove back to Chicago that evening on a highway that ran alongside Lake Michigan for a long stretch, and the water was there in the dark to her left, enormous and indifferent and permanent, and she drove with her window cracked, and the October air coming in cold and real. And she thought about the woman who had sat on the edge of a bathtub 14 months ago and made a decision. Not a heroic decision, not a dramatic one, just the decision of a woman who knew what she had built and was not willing to let it be taken. Who understood that the path from that bathtub to this car would be long and precise and would require everything she had, and who had decided in those 45 minutes of the kind of crying that does not make sound that everything she had was enough. It had been enough. She was Emily Carter. She had built something extraordinary. She had protected it, recovered it, and given it a name that could not be erased again. And now she was going home to build something more.